March 10, 1876, Boston. A laboratory cluttered with wires, batteries, and experimental equipment. Alexander Graham Bell is in one room, his assistant Thomas Watson in another, connected by a wire. Bell accidentally spills battery acid on himself and instinctively calls out, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." In the next room, Watson hears the words, transmitted electrically through the wire. They're the first words ever spoken by telephone. This moment will change human civilization. Within decades, voices will travel across continents and oceans. Within a century, nearly every building in the developed world will have a telephone. This simple device, transmitting sound through electrical signals, will connect humanity in ways unimaginable before. This is the story of how the telephone was invented, a tale of brilliant scientists and ruthless competitors, courtroom battles over patents, technological breakthroughs and tragic lost credit, fortune made and lost. It's the story of how humanity conquered distance and made instant voice communication possible. The telephone didn't emerge from nothing. It built on decades of work in electricity, sound, and telegraphy. The telegraph, invented in the 1830s and 40s, had already revolutionized communication. Samuel Morse's telegraph system, using electrical pulses to send coded messages through wires, connected cities and continents. By the 1870s, telegraph lines crisscrossed America and cables crossed the Atlantic. But the telegraph was limited. Messages were sent in Morse code, dots and dashes, requiring trained operators to translate. Communication was text-based, slow, and expensive. Multiple messages couldn't share the same wire simultaneously. As telegraph traffic grew, the system's limitations became painfully clear. Inventors worldwide sought to improve it. The harmonic telegraph, or multiple telegraph, aimed to send multiple messages simultaneously over one wire using different frequencies, like different musical notes. This would multiply telegraph capacity without stringing new wires. Several inventors pursued this idea in the 1870s, including Elisha Gray in Chicago and Alexander Graham Bell in Boston. Alexander Graham Bell was an unlikely inventor. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1847, he came from a family devoted to speech and hearing. His grandfather was an elocution teacher. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, developed visible speech, a system of written symbols showing how to position the mouth, tongue, and throat to produce any sound in any language. This was revolutionary for teaching deaf people to speak. Bell's mother was nearly deaf, which shaped his life. He learned to speak slowly and clearly so she could understand. Two of his brothers died of tuberculosis, leaving Alexander the sole survivor. These family experiences, deafness, death, the study of sound and speech, profoundly influenced him. Bell became a speech teacher like his father, working with deaf students. In 1870, after his brother's death, the family moved to Canada for health reasons. Then Bell moved to Boston in 1871. He taught deaf students, including Helen Keller later in his career. His work with the deaf wasn't a side interest. It was his passion and primary profession. The telephone was almost an accident. Bell became obsessed with the idea of transmitting speech electrically. If telegraph wires could carry electrical pulses, why couldn't they carry the complex vibrations of human speech? Bell understood acoustics deeply from his speech work. He knew sound was vibration, waves of compressed air. If those vibrations could be converted to electrical signals, transmitted through wire, then reconverted to sound, you'd have a speaking telegraph, a telephone. But Bell wasn't an electrical engineer. He was a speech teacher who dabbled in invention. He needed technical help. In 1874, he hired Thomas Watson, a skilled machinist and electrician, to build his experimental devices. Watson was 20, Bell was 27. They formed a perfect partnership, Bell the visionary theorist, Watson the practical builder. Bell also needed money. Experimentation was expensive. Two wealthy Bostonians, Gardiner Green Hubbard and Thomas Sanders, whose deaf children Bell taught, agreed to finance his work in exchange for shares in any resulting patents. This arrangement would make them all wealthy but also create decades of legal battles. Bell initially worked on the harmonic telegraph, his backers' preferred project, but he was secretly obsessed with transmitting speech. He spent countless hours experimenting, often neglecting his teaching duties. Hubbard, his financial backer and future father-in-law, Bell was courting Hubbard's deaf daughter Mabel, repeatedly urged him to focus on the profitable harmonic telegraph, not the speculative telephone. But Bell persisted. On June 2, 1875 came a crucial breakthrough. Bell and Watson were testing the harmonic telegraph, which used metal reeds tuned to different frequencies. One reed was stuck. Watson plucked it to free it. In the next room, Bell heard the vibration transmitted electrically through the wire. It wasn't speech, but it was sound, transmitted as a continuous electrical current that varied with the sound's intensity, not just on-off pulses like telegraph code. Bell realized the implication immediately. If plucking a reed could be transmitted, so could speech. Sound waves, including the complex waves of human voice, could be converted to corresponding electrical waves, transmitted through wire and reconverted to sound. He discovered the principle of the telephone. Bell designed a device. A thin membrane like an eardrum would vibrate in response to sound waves. Attached to the membrane was a needle dipping into a conductive liquid, acidulated water. As the membrane vibrated, the needle moved, varying the electrical resistance and creating a fluctuating electrical current matching the sound waves. At the receiving end, the process reversed. Fluctuating current made an electromagnet pull on a membrane, recreating the sound. Bell filed a patent application on February 14, 1876, Valentine's Day. The application described his telephone invention in broad terms, claiming the method of transmitting vocal or other sounds telegraphically by causing electrical undulations similar to the vibrations of air. And here the story takes a dramatic turn. On the same day, February 14, 1876, just hours later, Elisha Gray filed a patent caveat for a remarkably similar device. A caveat wasn't a full patent but a declaration of intent to file a patent, reserving priority. Gray's device used nearly identical principles: a vibrating diaphragm, a needle in liquid varying electrical resistance, transmitted speech. Who invented the telephone first? This question would fuel decades of controversy and litigation. The Standard story says Bell filed first. His patent application was stamped fifth that day, Gray's caveat around 2 p.m. Bell got patent number 174,465 on March 7, 1876, perhaps the most valuable patent ever issued. But conspiracy theories persisted. Did Bell see Gray's caveat? Patent office employees were known to be corrupt. Bell added a marginal note to his patent application about using variable resistance with a liquid transmitter that was suspiciously similar to Gray's caveat. Had Bell stolen the idea? Historians have debated this for 150 years. Most conclude Bell filed legitimately, though the timing was extraordinarily close. Both men had been working toward the same goal using similar principles. It was simultaneous invention, common in science when the technology and knowledge are ready. Regardless, Bell had the patent. Now he needed to make it work reliably. 3 days after receiving his patent on March 10, 1876, came the famous accident. Bell and Watson were testing a liquid transmitter, the design described in Bell's patent application and similar to Gray's caveat. Bell spilled battery acid and called for help. Watson heard him through the device. The first telephone conversation was, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." It's perhaps appropriate that the first telephone call was a call for help, foreshadowing how telephones would be used for emergencies. It's also fitting that it was accidental. Many great discoveries involve serendipity. But the liquid transmitter was impractical, messy, unreliable, requiring batteries. Bell demonstrated his telephone at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. Brazilian Emperor Dom Pedro II famously exclaimed, "My God, it talks," when Bell recited Hamlet. The telephone won awards and generated excitement, but was dismissed by Western Union telegraph officials as a toy. Improvements came rapidly. Thomas Edison, working for Western Union, invented the carbon microphone in 1877, far superior to Bell's liquid transmitter. Carbon granules varied their resistance when compressed by sound waves, creating stronger, clearer signals. This became the standard telephone transmitter for a century. Emil Berliner, a German immigrant in Washington, D.C., independently invented a microphone around the same time and sold the patent to Bell. The permanent magnet receiver, converting electrical signals back to sound, also improved quickly. By 1877, Bell Telephone Company was established to commercialize the invention. Bell's backers, Hubbard and Sanders, ran the business. Bell himself, uncomfortable with business and litigation, largely stepped away. He'd made his invention, others would exploit it. The first telephone line connected Hubbard's home in Cambridge to his downtown Boston office. The first commercial telephone service began in New Haven, Connecticut in 1878. Telephones were installed in pairs, one in a home, one in an office or shop. You could only call the paired phone. It was primitive but revolutionary. For the first time, you could talk to someone miles away as if they were in the same room. Telephone exchanges, central offices where operators manually connected calls, emerged quickly. The first exchange opened in New Haven in 1878 with 21 subscribers. Operators, initially boys but soon replaced by young women deemed more polite, manually connected calls by plugging wires into switchboards. The telephone spread was rapid. By 1880, there were 60,000 telephones in America. By 1900, over 600,000. By 1910, over 7 million. The telephone was transforming from novelty to necessity. But Western Union, realizing it had dismissed a revolution, fought back. It hired Edison and other inventors to develop competing systems, hoping to circumvent Bell's patents. This triggered the telephone wars, vicious legal and commercial battles. Bell Telephone Company sued Western Union for patent infringement in 1878. Western Union countersued. The legal battle was bitter. Western Union had vast resources and political connections, but Bell had a crucial advantage: his foundational patent, number 174,465, covered the basic principle of transmitting speech electrically. Any telephone, regardless of specific design, infringed this patent. In 1879, Western Union settled, agreeing to exit the telephone business and recognizing Bell's patent in exchange for 20% of telephone rental receipts for the patent's life. This settlement secured Bell Telephone's dominance. But the patent wars weren't over. As the telephone industry grew enormously profitable, countless lawsuits challenged Bell's patents. Over 600 legal challenges emerged. Some claimed Bell stole the invention. Others claimed independent invention. Some were legitimate. Many were opportunistic attempts to profit from the telephone's success. The most significant challenge came from the U.S. government itself. In 1887, the government filed suit to annul Bell's patents, claiming fraud in obtaining them. The case alleged Bell had seen Gray's caveat and stolen the idea. The government's evidence was thin, based largely on circumstantial inferences and testimony from disgruntled patent examiners. The case dragged through courts for years. In 1896, the Supreme Court finally dismissed it. Bell's patents were upheld. Alexander Graham Bell was legally confirmed as the telephone's inventor, but doubts lingered and alternative claimants emerged. Antonio Muxi, an Italian-American inventor in New York, claimed he'd invented the telephone before Bell. Muxi had indeed developed a voice communication device in the 1850s, the teletrafono. to communicate between floors of his home so his invalid wife could call him. Muxai demonstrated his device and filed a patent caveat in 1871. But Muxai was poor, spoke limited English, and couldn't afford the full patent fee. His caveat lapsed in 1874. He showed his device to Western Union officials who kept his materials but did nothing. Muxai couldn't afford to sue. He died in 1889, impoverished and forgotten. In 2002, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution recognizing Muxai's contributions, stating he demonstrated early versions of the telephone but lacked the means to develop or commercialize it. Some historians consider Mux the true inventor. Others note his devices lacked key elements of a practical telephone. The debate continues. Elisha Gray also had legitimate claims. His caveat described a working telephone. Gray later said he considered his own harmonic telegraph work more valuable than the telephone and hadn't rushed to patent it. By the time he realized the telephone's value, Bell had the patent. Gray spent years litigating but never prevailed. He died in 1901, bitter about losing credit and fortune. Regardless of priority disputes, Bell was the one who secured the patent, demonstrated the telephone publicly, attracted investment, and built the industry. History, rightly or not, credits him. Bell personally moved on to other interests. He married Mabel Hubbard in 1877, the same year his telephone was commercialized. She was deaf. The daughter of his financial backer. Their marriage was happy, lasting until his death. They had 4 children, 2 of whom died in infancy. Bell used his telephone wealth to fund diverse scientific interests. He worked on aviation, experimenting with kites and aircraft. He developed a metal detector used unsuccessfully to locate the bullet in President Garfield after his 1881 assassination. He worked on hydrofoils, setting a water speed record that stood for decades. He founded the National Geographic Society and served as its president. But Bell's passion remained helping the deaf. He advocated for oralism, teaching deaf people to speak and lip-read rather than use sign language. This was controversial then and remains so. Many deaf people and advocates view sign language as a valid language and oralism as oppressive. Bell's views were paternalistic, rooted in Victorian attitudes about normalcy and assimilation. His work helping deaf individuals was genuine, but his philosophy about how to help them was and is contested. Bell also dabbled in eugenics, advocating against deaf people marrying each other to prevent hereditary deafness. These views, common among progressive reformers of his era, are now considered deeply wrong. Bell's legacy is thus complicated, celebrated inventor and helper of the deaf, but also paternalistic and influenced by eugenicist thinking. Meanwhile, the telephone system was transforming society. Early telephones required operators to manually connect calls. Exchanges employed thousands of women, hello girls, working switchboards. It was one of the first professions open to women, though the work was poorly paid and tightly controlled. Almond Stroger, a Kansas City undertaker, believed telephone operators were directing his business calls to competitors. In 1891, he invented the automatic telephone exchange, mechanical switches that connected calls without operators. The Stroger switch used rotary dials and stepping relays. Dial telephones emerged, letting users connect calls themselves. Automation gradually replaced operators for local calls, though long distance still required operator assistance for decades. Long-distance telephony posed technical challenges. Electrical signals weaken over distance, and voices became faint on long lines. Loading coils, inductors placed at intervals along wires, reduced signal degradation, extending range. AT&T engineer George Campbell developed loading coil theory in 1899, making long-distance calls practical. The first transcontinental telephone line opened in 1915, connecting New York and San Francisco. Alexander Graham Bell in New York ceremonially called Thomas Watson in San Francisco, recreating their first call. Bell said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Watson replied, "It would take me a week now." Transatlantic telephone cables came later. Radio made international calls possible in the 1920s, though quality was poor. The first transatlantic telephone cable, TAT-1, wasn't laid until 1956, using amplifiers to boost signals. The telephone's social impact was profound. It changed business, orders could be placed instantly, information shared immediately. It changed emergencies, you could call for help. It changed social life, you could chat with friends without visiting. It changed courtship, young people could talk privately, away from parental supervision. Telephones also changed urban planning. Before telephones, businesses needed messengers to communicate, so they clustered downtown near each other. Telephones allowed geographic dispersion. Suburbs became viable. You could live far from work and stay connected. Telephones enabled remote management of distributed operations. Party lines, multiple households sharing one line, were common in rural areas and small towns. Anyone could listen to neighbors' conversations, reducing privacy but creating community. Party line etiquette, limiting call length, not eavesdropping, emerged as social norms. Telephone companies became monopolies. AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph, which evolved from Bell Telephone Company, dominated American telephony for most of the 20th century. The company argued telephone service was a natural monopoly. Competition would be wasteful, requiring duplicate wiring. Government accepted this, allowing monopoly but regulating prices. AT&T's monopoly had benefits and costs. Universal service, connecting every home, was achieved. Quality and reliability were high. Innovation occurred at Bell Labs, AT&T's research arm, which invented transistors, lasers, information theory, and much more. But competition was suppressed, prices were high, and innovation in some areas was slow. The 1982 antitrust breakup of AT&T ended the monopoly, splitting the company into regional Baby Bells and a long-distance company. Competition increased, prices fell, but universal service weakened and network coordination became more complex. Telephone design evolved from bulky wooden boxes with separate earpiece and speaker, to elegant rotary dial phones, to push-button tone phones, to wireless cordless phones. Answering machines, invented in the 1930s but popularized in the 1980s, ended the requirement that someone be home to receive calls. Mobile telephony emerged slowly. Radio telephones in cars existed from the 1940s but were expensive, bulky, and had limited capacity. The cellular concept, dividing areas into cells with separate frequencies, allowing frequency reuse, enabled modern mobile phones. The first handheld mobile phone call was made in 1973 by Motorola's Martin Cooper. Mobile phones were initially huge, expensive, and had terrible battery life. They were status symbols for the wealthy. But technology improved. Phones shrank, prices fell, networks expanded. By the 1990s, mobile phones were common. By the 2000s, they were ubiquitous. Smartphones, combining phone with computer, emerged in the 2000s. The iPhone, introduced in 2007, transformed phones into pocket computers with internet access, cameras, GPS, and countless apps. Today, billions of people worldwide have phones, most of them mobile. In many developing countries, people skipped landlines entirely, going straight to mobile. The telephone, in its modern smartphone form, has become humanity's most ubiquitous technology. Voice over IP, VoIP, transmitting phone calls over the internet rather than traditional phone networks, emerged in the 1990s. Services like Skype let people make free voice and video calls worldwide. Traditional phone companies struggled to compete with internet-based communication. The telephone transformed from specialized communication tool to general-purpose device. Modern smartphones are cameras, internet browsers, messaging platforms, music players, maps, payment systems, and occasionally phones. Voice calls, the original purpose, are now just one function among many. Ironically, young people increasingly avoid voice calls, preferring text messaging and social media. The telephone, invented to enable voice communication, is often used for everything but talking. Yet the fundamental invention, transmitting information electronically, connecting people across distances, remains as revolutionary as when Bell first spoke to Watson. Alexander Graham Bell died in 1922 at age 75 at his estate in Nova Scotia, Canada. On the day of his burial, all telephone service in North America stopped for 1 minute in his honor, a silent tribute to the man whose invention had connected millions. Bell's legacy is complex. He's remembered as a great inventor, but his invention emerged from incremental improvements by many people. He's celebrated for helping the deaf, but his oralism advocacy is controversial. He was a devoted husband and curious scientist, but also held problematic eugenicist views. He became wealthy from the telephone but spent that wealth on scientific pursuits, not luxury. The telephone's invention wasn't a single eureka moment but an evolution. Muxi built early voice transmission devices. Gray filed a caveat the same day as Bell's patent. Edison improved the transmitter. Countless engineers developed exchanges, long-distance systems, and improvements. But Bell secured the patent, built the industry, and became the recognized inventor, whether entirely fairly or not. The telephone patent, number 174,465, has been called the most valuable patent in history. Bell Telephone Company became AT&T, which became one of the world's largest corporations. The telephone created entirely new industries: switchboard manufacturing, operator employment, telephone books, answering services, and transformed existing ones. More fundamentally, the telephone changed human experience. For millennia, communicating across distance meant writing letters or sending messengers. The telegraph enabled rapid long-distance communication, but was impersonal and required intermediaries. The telephone made instant, personal, voice-to-voice communication possible for the first time. This intimacy at a distance was revolutionary. You could hear a loved one's voice from across the country. You could have real-time conversations, with all the nuance and emotion voice conveys. The telephone collapsed space, making distance nearly irrelevant for communication. The telephone also democratized communication. Telegraph was expensive for businesses and emergencies. Telephones were for everyone. By mid-20th century, most American households had phones. Communication that once required wealth or official purpose became available to all. Yet the telephone also created new anxieties. People worried about privacy. Party lines were notoriously indiscreet. They worried about telephone addiction, people spending hours chatting instead of working or visiting in person. They worried about proper telephone etiquette, when to call, how long to talk, whether it was rude to end conversations. These anxieties anticipate modern concerns about smartphones and social media. The telephone's military importance was also significant. World Wars I and II saw telephone networks connecting commanders to troops, enabling coordinated operations impossible with messengers or telegraph. The red phone, hotline between U.S. and Soviet leaders during the Cold War, actually a teletype, not a phone, symbolized how communication technology could prevent nuclear war. From Bell's spilled acid to smartphones in billions of pockets, the telephone's evolution spans 150 years. The basic principle, converting sound to electrical signals, transmitting them, reconverting to sound, remains unchanged, though the implementation has transformed completely. Bell's telephone used analog electrical currents varying continuously with sound waves. Modern digital phones convert sound to binary data, ones and zeros, transmitted as light pulses through fiber optic cables or radio waves through cell towers. The fidelity is higher, the distance unlimited, and video can be transmitted alongside voice. But the fundamental concept, transmitting speech electrically, remains Bell's insight. The telephone, in its smartphone incarnation, has become so ubiquitous we forget how revolutionary it is. We casually video call someone on another continent, annoyed if there's a slight delay. We forget that our grandparents' generation found long-distance calls special enough to save for holidays. We forget that our great-grandparents might have never made a phone call at all. The telephone conquered distance, connected humanity, and transformed civilization. It's one of the inventions that created the modern world, alongside electricity, internal combustion engines, antibiotics, and computers. These technologies didn't just make life easier, they fundamentally changed what's possible, how society operates, and how humans relate to each other. When Alexander Graham Bell called Mr. Watson, "Come here" on that March day in 1876, he didn't just ask for help with spilled acid. He called the entire future, a future where distance would no longer separate us, where voices could travel instantly around the world, where connection would be as simple as pressing a button. That future is now our present, and it all began with those 8 words transmitted through a wire.